Okay. I think before I begin, I better give you some context about myself. I am an experimentalist. I'm not a theoretician. I'm not a philosopher. I am interested only in objectively verifiable information. And what I'm going to talk about now is based entirely on experimental data that has been reviewed and published in peer-reviewed journals, and it represents the best kind of thinking about the subject that we have. So I'm not speculating, I'm not theorizing, and I want to start, I guess, by asking this question: why does religion exist? Why does it exist? Now, very interestingly, we see from the archaeological data that religion dates back at least 430,000 years. In excavations in Spain, Uzbekistan, and France, sites have been found with Neanderthal that represent clearly that they had a sense of spiritual beliefs and a sense of the continuity of consciousness. Why? If you think about it, materialism, physicalism, only has been around for 459 years as of today. It begins with the Council of Trent, the 19th Ecumenical Council of the Roman Catholic Church, which was convened in Trento and Bologna, Italy, from 1545 to 1563. It was called for several reasons. One was the beginning of the Protestant Reformation movement, and the other was the fact that science as an activity was beginning to develop as a separate cultural function, Galileo's telescope being an example. And after the 25 meetings of the Roman authorities in these ecumenical meetings, they issued an edict. And they said everything that has to do with spirit, read consciousness, that's our world. Everything that has to do with physical reality, that's you in science, that's your world. But if you cross over into our world and we can get our hands on you, we will kill you. And they did, by the thousands. And the result was that science split off from religion, and scientists, although many still maintained interest in these subjects, Newton's interest in alchemy being one example, they didn't talk about it. We have no idea why Newton believed with equal passion about gravity and alchemy. We know he must have had some sense of consciousness, but we don't know what it is. So when I look at religion as an experimentalist that dates back 430,000 years to another earlier hominid species, I ask myself why. And the answer, I think, is because religion is focused on opening to non-local consciousness. Now, what do I mean by non-local consciousness? The term, by the way, non-local consciousness, was coined in 1981 by Larry Dossey, a researcher and best-selling author and founder of the journal Explore. Non-local consciousness is that aspect of consciousness which is not physiologically based. It is not limited by space and time. We know this, and I will get into some of the experimental evidence, but I have a very limited time. In any case, if you look at religion from that perspective, what you see is that it looks like an empirical science in which, when you examine the foundations of all the religions, you put aside the dogmas and the cultural aspects, and you just look at how in every culture of humanity, across the entire course of humanity, religion developed. The answer, I think, is that religion begins when you look at its origins, because it is about opening to non-local consciousness. This aspect of consciousness which exists before you incarnate and continues after corporeal death. This eternal self, what religion in the West calls the soul. Now, you in India did not have this Council of Trent problem, and so in your culture, the idea of non-local consciousness still continues and thrives. But in the West, it died off and is only now reawakening as the materialist paradigm begins to confront the anomalies, just as Thomas Kuhn described, that are forcing it into crisis. Now, when you look at religions, I'll just give you three. Look at all the enduring religions. You see that they all begin with one individual who has a non-local consciousness experience. The Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, a young nobleman, goes up to Adar Kalami's ashram and gets taught how to meditate and awakens. Jesus comes from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John the Baptist, and he goes into the desert and meditates and awakens. Muhammad goes off to the sacred cave of Hira. He meditates, has an experience in which he sees the Archangel Gabriel, culturally appropriate, and he awakens. So every one of these religions awakens because an individual has a non-local consciousness experience. And if you think about the contexts and forms of religion, regardless of culture, you put aside the scriptures and the dogmas, what you find is in every culture across all of history, the same elements spontaneously appear because it is an empirical science of consciousness. For instance, let me just go through some of them. Why do we go to churches or synagogues or temples or monasteries? Why do we go to the same place to gather? What is the evidence for that? There are certainly cultural reasons, but what drives that? The answer is because we know from experimental research that acts of intentioned observation produce an informational enriching process in the non-local level that makes them more numinous. As Carl Jung said, noumena are psychic entia outside of space-time. And so when you begin to think about this, you begin to realize what we're looking at in what we call reality is actually an information phenomena of information architectures created by intentioned consciousness. Now, for instance, how do we know that this numinosity occurs? Well, in remote viewing research, and I'm one of the people that created remote viewing, we know that it is easier for a remote viewer to see Schwatrz Cathedral than it is a warehouse of the same physical size. Now, why is that? And the answer is because from the moment it was conceived, Schwatrz Cathedral has been the focus of intentioned observation by thousands, millions of people, whereas a French warehouse draws no attention at all while you drive by it. And we've done experiment after experiment like this, in which we find that whenever the target is a highly numinous target, it is easier for people who try to open to non-local consciousness to see it than if it is a target of low numinosity. Why is meditation, in those three stories of the founding of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, why is the key thing that happens meditation? Now, yesterday, the presenters went through a lot of the physical stuff that goes on, the psychophysical activity in the brain. But I want to address another issue which doesn't get a lot of attention, and that is we know from experimental research that the ability to attain and sustain intentioned, focused awareness, however you do it, and there are many ways, is the key to opening to the non-local aspect of your consciousness. It is an aspect which is fundamental to your beingness. So it's not how you do the meditation so much as all forms of meditation. The function is to suppress the normal sensory activity of our neuroanatomy, which floods us with information. It's hot, it's cold, I'm tired, my back aches, all that sort of stuff, or all of the sort of mundane thoughts. Will my boss like me? Will the woman I'm taking out like me? Will the man I'm going out with like me? All of that stuff falls away. And you become quiet. In religion, they speak of the still small voice. What they're talking about is this non-local aspect of consciousness, which is a core part of your being. And in every religion, whether it's Hindu temples, Buddhist monasteries, Christian seminaries, Japanese martial art dojos, whatever, they all teach meditation. Why do they do that? And the answer is because, as a basis of empirical science, humans have learned that when you can attain and sustain intention-focused awareness, you can open to this part of yourself that gives you access to the eternal self. And when you do that, we know from the experimental evidence, you can get information about anything. I have watched people from around the world look at a blank piece of map from which all the colors and names have been taken away, so it's just an outline of something. They don't know where it is. And I say to them, for instance, is Cleopatra's palace located within the confines of this map? And if they say yes, I say, would you please locate it for me? And they make a little circle on the map. And where a number of people pick the same location, that's where I go and look. And that's how I found Cleopatra's palace and Mark Antony's palace and the lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. That's how I found Christopher Columbus's caravel, how I found all sorts of other things, the Brig Leander in the Bahamas. How are people able to go back thousands of years in time to get information and describe it in detail that is as fine as a 16th of an inch? Think about that. That's what freaks people out in the American government about remote viewing, because it meant there were no secrets. And that a remote viewer could look at a politician and find out, is he having an affair? Is he taking corrupt graft? Freaks people out to realize that when we open to non-local consciousness, we join with this unity of consciousness. And when we do that, we can obtain information about anything. And in fact, if you look at how people have creative moments of creative breakthroughs, or religious epiphanies or do just remote viewings, and you ask them, what was the experience like? They all tell you the same thing. I feel I went into a state of consciousness. Thank you. I went into a state of consciousness in which I had this image of whatever, and I just knew. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. And so in every religion on earth for all of time, back to the pre-Homo sapiens, the idea was you can make access to this part of yourself, and every religion in the world develops some technique for doing this because it is an empirical science. You have one individual who has an experience and whose beingness is so compelling that other people stop and listen to him. I had two friends, a man named Schwatrz Sharma, who was the chairman of philosophy at Jaipur University, who also came to become the head of the I Am a Human Church, I think it's called. I can't think of the way it's described in Hindu. But in any case, and another woman, Margaret Burke White, a famous photographer, and both of whom got to know Gandhi. And I asked them, what was he like? I mean, he's this little man in the dhoti, and he has no money. He has no official position. How did this man get India liberation and independence without a war? The United States couldn't do it. And in fact, I can't find another example around the world. And they all said to me the same thing that Gandhi said about himself. There was just something about him that moved you and made you want to support what he was doing. And when, just before he was assassinated, the Times of India sent a reporter up to interview him, the reporter said, my editor sent me up here to ask a single question. How did you force the British to leave India without a war? You had no army. You have no money. You have no official position. How did you force them to leave and give up their most precious colonial possession? And Gandhi's answer was, it's not what we did that mattered, although that mattered. It's not what we said that mattered, although it did matter. It was the nature of our character, who we were as people, that made the British choose to leave India. Note the change in the verbs from force to choose. Religions understand that when groups of people gather together and hold common intention, they can create social change. You gather in this sacred space that becomes sacred because it is the focus of intentioned observation by hundreds or thousands or millions of people. You gather there. You make a statement of affirmation. If you're a Christian, it's the Nicene Creed. If you're a Jew, it's the Shema. I don't know what it is if you were a Hindu. I apologize for not knowing that. And then you go in, and there is a period of singing, dancing, or chanting. Now, why? Why does that happen? Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist, asked that very question, and so they hooked people up to EEGs. And what they found as the service went on was when they sang or danced or chanted together or drummed, doesn't matter, that's all the cultural part, all their brains entrained. Everybody's brain begins to entrain, and they hold a common linked purpose. They become linked at the non-local level. And when they hold their intention, They are moved deeply, psychologically, by what they experience. And then there is a moment where in many cultures, many religions, and why does this happen all across the world? And it's always the same. There is a period where people can have, not all the people, not all the time, but some of the people, some of the time, have publicly non-local experiences. They prophesy, they heal, they speak in tongues, whatever. Because they are having a non-local consciousness experience, and that is witnessed by the group, the congregation, and that affirms the reality of what they have been doing and the power of their service. How much time have I used it all up?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Some
a bunch of other things I wanted to get into, but okay, I will quit. Anyway, I want to say one final thing. How do groups of individuals and small groups change the course of history? Here is the answer, and it's quite simple, and you can do it. Every day, you make dozens of little choices, quotidian choices, I call them, mundane, ordinary. The cat food you buy, the toothpaste you buy, the towel you buy, the shirt you buy, whatever. When you are faced with that kind of decision, always choose of the options that are available to you, to the best of your understanding at that moment, that you will choose the option that is the most compassionate, life-affirming, and fostering of well-being. And you will tell 10 of your friends that you're doing it as a discipline and invite them to join and ask 10 of their friends, and so forth and so on. The people that are in this room at this moment, if they will do this, commit to this as a discipline, can change the course of India's history to foster well-being. It is up to you. Are you prepared to stand to do this? Are you prepared to become an agent of change for well-being? Thank you.